Hello everyone, welcome back, but before getting into the second part, I just want to clarify a few quick things. First off, if you haven't already, make sure to watch the first part in this series. I explain how this series is going to work while also explaining what each category is. If you watch this without the first part, you may be confused. Finally, once again, this video will be discussing disturbing topics that may not be for everyone. Viewer discretion is advised with spoilers for these 4 films. Okay, now let's get right into it. Unlike a lot of the other ones on here, I'd actually seen this one before multiple times, and before getting into my opinions on it, I need to let you guys in on a little secret. I'm not actually the biggest fan of Rob Zombie. I know that may be shocking to some horror fans, as some of his stuff is incredibly popular within the horror community. This film, especially, as well as its sequel, The Devil's Rejects. His style is extremely abrasive, with rapid-fire editing, intentionally disorienting camera work, and unlikable characters, and honestly, I get the appeal, but his style has never really resonated with me in the way that other horror directors like his contemporaries, such as James Wan and Guillermo del Toro, have. But honestly, as much as his style hasn't resonated with me on many of his films, I actually surprisingly enjoyed this film. Now, I didn't on my first viewing of it, in fact I discarded it like a lot of his other works, but some of my friends begged me to rewatch it, and honestly, I've enjoyed it more with each viewing. See, House of a Thousand Corpses follows a group of teenagers who find this roadside attraction ran by Captain Spaulding. Here he tells the story of Dr. Satan and sends them down an old road to find his burial spot, where they pick up one of the fireflies. She then invites them to her house and hell begins from there. Now, is this film as abrasive as the rest of his films? Most definitely. Hell, I would even say more than his typical films. But unlike his other stories where it just makes the plot fall apart and it just seems like the least likable characters getting their comeuppance, the angry and aggressive way that the Firefly family is filmed here kinda works. It almost feels like a more fucked up version of one of his music videos in the best possible way, but while this film works in his style, one gripe has always stuck with me each and every time while watching it, which is that I've seen this story before better, which is of course the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's honestly why I prefer The Devil's Rejects a bit more, because it really becomes its own thing at that point, with the Fireflies feeling a lot more fleshed out and real than they do in this film. In this movie, the family reminds me a bit more of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where they don't exactly have much of a personality to them, and so they were just designed in a way to make us as uncomfortable as possible. It's something that's always loomed over this film for me, not to mention the pacing issues the film definitely has, with it quite literally being all over the place. It really is a top-heavy film, as I really enjoyed the setup of the story, with these horror buffs checking out the story of a serial killer and getting picked off one by one. It's an interesting concept, and the Firefly family plays really well into that, as we wonder why they are possibly doing this, and we are never really given a true reason. However, I think the film begins to really fall off when the girl is captured and put into the bunny suit for Dr. Satan, as from that point it really feels like the film is just trying to throw everything out at you and try to make you feel as uncomfortable as possible. Also, sometimes his abrasive style gets to be so much that it comes across almost as comical towards the end, with large chunks of it feeling like just a haunted house movie. Like the scenes in the well where they run into a group of monsters that are never really explained well within the film, like the weird zombie creatures in the water and the burn victim with the axe. Yes, they're creepy visually, but the film never really explains what any of these things are, and the sequel never really explains them either, just leaving me completely confused each time that I'm watching it. Like, sometimes I feel like I'm the only one who gets completely confused by this. Maybe I'm just missing something, but honestly, it just seems like it's trying to go insane, and I really have no idea where it comes from. When giving it a score, I really can only give it a 6 out of 10. I'm honestly a bit surprised that this film lands on this list due to the film not necessarily being seen as extremely disturbing to me whatsoever. I saw this film pretty young too, but I never once found it to be that scary or disturbing compared to a lot of the other films that I had seen up to that point, so I always found its legacy somewhat confusing. I think it's because of the sort of disconnect the film has, where it never really gets real to the point of making the world itself believable. It honestly gets so stylized to the point where it feels like it has an identity crisis somewhere in the middle. Like, it feels too much like one of his music videos to actually be like its own thing. So I think for me, honestly, I would put it into the getting there category. It's definitely not one of the most disturbing films I've ever seen, and I've seen far, far worse, and this just doesn't hit me like some of the other ones on this list. I'm honestly kind of surprised that this is on here, because yes, the film is graphic, but it never really gets disturbing in my head. Like, yeah, the movie gets mildly uncomfortable at points, but do I think it's anywhere near like the top disturbing films ever made? No. And honestly, that's how a lot of these films have been so far. I'm really surprised that a lot of these have been listed as some of the most disturbing films ever made. Kind of like the next one, that of course being Before getting into this section, make sure if you haven't already to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Also, let me know, do you guys agree or disagree with my takes here? I really want to hear your opinions on them, as well as whether you think the films are disturbing or not. I know disturbing films are not for everyone, and I know a lot of these films are quite divisive, so discussion around these are always pretty fun. And now let's continue. Of the films I've covered so far, this is probably the one that I've seen the most over the years, as I just love 80s body horror. And while I could say that I saw it too young or it scarred me for life, as I watched a lot of these body horror films growing up, but Society never really has bothered me that much. Call me desensitized, but I always thought Society was a bit cheesy, in a good way nonetheless, but I've always been so surprised to see that this film is listed as one of the most disturbing movies ever made, as while one scene in it is quite disturbing, I would put it nowhere near the same levels as a lot of the other ones on this list. Society follows Bill, a Beverly Hills high schooler who lives in an extremely wealthy household where he begins to notice some odd stuff about the people around him. Mainly people facing the wrong way and bugs in his apples. Slowly, people in the area are beginning to go missing, which is where the film starts to get its reputation. As while it may seem like a normal slasher movie, the film then takes a complete left turn, revealing that the wealthy are actually a different species which feed off humans. It's a great twist and honestly elevates the film past a lot of its 80s body horror contemporaries for me, but it's still somewhat played for laughs, giving the film a more goofy quality than overly frightening.
Well, son, I guess you're right. I am a butthead.
Like, seriously, what the fuck even is this? And honestly, I want to talk about these practical effects a bit, as while they certainly are a bit goofy and have aged quite a bit, they certainly make the film stand in a way that I honestly think wouldn't have really been possible with CGI. Like, this movie is absolutely insane, with some of the goofiest effects you'll ever see. I cannot stress enough that this is an 80s body horror film through and through, and honestly it makes the film somewhat charming in its own right. Don't get me wrong, the film is quite a bit of a mess in many aspects. Like, the acting is incredibly goofy in many segments, and some of the effects have aged terribly. But I don't know, this film just has a charm to it similar to films like From Beyond and Return of the Living Dead, where there are many aspects that would ruin a ton of films, but the passion behind them is just so interesting to see put to life. These films are effect showcases, and there's always a place for that, and combine that with a somewhat interesting story, and I'm completely sold. There's nothing wrong with fun movies, and that's exactly the category that I would put Society in. As well as a strong message, it still is fun enough that it makes for an extremely entertaining experience. Now, would I put it anywhere near the best body horror films ever made? Of course not, there are much better ones out there, but the film never really tries to be anything more than it needs to be, and I applaud the film for doing that. Many of the other films on this list try to be a lot more than what is required for the story to get an extreme response out of you, but I feel like this film strikes just the right balance between what the fuckness with an actual story. Compare this to films like Begotten, which while having a lot of disturbing imagery, I feel like there was not a lot of substance to what I was seeing. I feel like a lot of the 80s body horror films are good at restraining themselves for crossing that line. However, while I do enjoy that aspect of it, I really could not say it's that disturbing. There is much worse body horror out there, and while the message it's displaying does make the scenes much more frightening, it really is nowhere near the top ones. So where would I put this film in the disturbing ranking? Well, honestly, it would have to begin getting there as well. There are disturbing aspects for sure, definitely more than something like Altered States, but in comparison to some of the other ones that I see on this tier list, it really does not compare to any of the ones in those top tiers. But while I rank this pretty low in how disturbing I found it, remember that a lot of these films might still be a lot for people, so remember with any of these, viewer discretion is advised. It's definitely dependent on how effective the effects are in your mind, as they have this otherworldliness that a lot of the other disturbing films haven't really been able to replicate. But for me, I think the comedic aspects of this movie, while making it an enjoyable movie overall, keep it from really affecting me like a lot of the other ones on this list. But honestly, I'm glad the film didn't go for a full nihilistic way of doing it. This film, while being completely insane, does hold back a little bit, and it honestly makes it a much more enjoyable experience because of it. And I feel like if it had this super nihilistic tone to it, it probably wouldn't have been anywhere near as entertaining as it actually is. But for actually giving it a review score, I would most likely give it a 7 out of 10, which puts it in second place, only behind Deliverance thus far. Yes, there are a ton of flaws within this film. None of them really were distracting though, besides a few bad lines and goofy effects here and there. But for an 80s horror B-movie, I've really seen a lot worse. Yes, this one has aged a bit more compared to the others, but I feel like I enjoyed my time with this one so far the most. While I think Deliverance was a better film, its disturbing scene makes it a little bit too much at times, so I enjoyed this one a bit more, which is completely the opposite of the next one, which is, of course, So for this one, I'm going to be reviewing both versions of the film at some point, but for this we are just looking at the Austrian original, which has got to be one of the most frustrating films I have ever seen, but it's for the best. This movie leaves you angry and confused, while also leaving you with one of the most horrific concepts I've seen in a horror film. And remember, spoiler warning, as I will be spoiling the main twist here. I will put timestamps in the description if you guys want to skip to the next segment. Okay? Everyone ready? Let's begin. Funny Games follows a family coming to their vacation home where they run into two boys, Paul and Peter, who begin to play sadistic games of torture on the family, picking them off one by one. But the major twist of the film is really what makes the film stand out, with Paul breaking the fourth wall and rewinding the film just when the mother is able to finally turn the tables into her favor. And this shows one thing: no matter what this family does, there is no escape and they are doomed to fail, all while we are forced to watch in brutal fashion. It's so destructive that it might ruin the film for some people, because this film is just completely hopeless. Usually throughout these, the majority of the characters have multiple opportunities to escape, but just don't do them. However, this film has smart characters who actually start to win in the situation, but even then they are still doomed to fail. It's a brutal watch, and top that with extreme violence within the film, it really is shocking too that this film has a shot-for-shot remake of it, as most films like this get tamed down during the American remakes. The acting of the film also really sells it, as the deaths of George and Georgie are absolutely brutal. As when I watched this film for the first time with some friends, you could quite literally hear a pin drop during these scenes. Like, wow. It's absolutely brutal, and not in a way that's just disgusting like some of the others coming up, and it really is disturbing. But I feel like compared to a lot of the other ones on this list, I also feel like this film holds itself back in the best possible way. While the twist is absolutely crazy, I feel like this film does a good job never getting too much to the point of coming off like parody. Yes, it's definitely satirical, as the film seems to be discussing violence in the media and how we are so desensitized to it that we are able to watch a film about a brutal family murder, but I feel like the satire never gets in the way of just how horrible what we are seeing is. And while I think the satirical aspects of society hold it back from being as disturbing as it could possibly be, I feel like the satirical aspects here make the disturbing aspects stand out even more. It makes you feel bad about watching the film, as it directly comments on the type of film you are watching and the endless drive for more extremes within cinema. This movie seems to almost be mocking you for watching it, and in turn it gets even more impactful. I don't know if you guys got that out of the film, or if I'm just talking out of my ass here, let me know. But it's brilliant and excellently done, and would be nowhere near as effective without the amazing directing of Michael Haneke, one of the best Austrian horror directors, and we'll get some of his other films later. The film knows when to hold and when to keep going, with one of the most impactful being when it just holds on the dead family for nearly a whole minute. It's absolutely brutal. So when giving its disturbing ranking, I'm sure many of you guys can guess where this is going to go. This film hit me harder than a lot of the other ones that we've seen thus far, and honestly when I watched it a couple years ago, I thought about it for hours, even a couple days afterwards. I still remember the first viewing of this film and the silence that permeated the room afterwards, and only a couple other films I've seen have been able to pull off that effect. However, I have seen much worse, and I feel like the imagery, while disturbing and mixes great with the emotions the film is trying to push, which few ones on here are able to do, I just can't say it's one of the most disturbing that I've ever seen. Thus, I would have to put it in the traumatizing tier. It's definitely the most disturbing one thus far, and left me completely speechless on multiple occasions. But it's still not shockingly disturbing, where I thought about it for years, but looking at it on the ones here, only about one or two will probably actually go into this tier, so don't fret too much, this one is still a lot. Like, for example, really only the ones below disturbing would I recommend to general audiences. Most of these films really are above and beyond. If I put it in the disturbing tier, I would say most people probably would not enjoy these. So keep in mind, this is a tier above what I would recommend people to avoid. So this is really up there. Now, most people will probably be fine, but remember, viewer discretion is advised for films, especially the ones disturbing and above. Now, for what I actually thought about the film, this is one of my personal favorite disturbing films, and I find myself coming back to this one a little bit more than a lot of the other ones on this list. There aren't any super glaring issues within the film, and while I wouldn't put it in my top films I've ever seen, it's definitely one of the better exploitation films of the 90s. So I would give this an 8.5 out of 10, making this the best one thus far. Good job, Funny Games. We'll see how long you can stay at the very top. How this movie constantly gets recommended as one of the scariest and most disturbing films, I will never know. This film seems like one that is destined to be shown in segments on TikTok because seriously, besides the one singular part, this film is just bad. Like, to the point where on multiple occasions, I thought the film was just pulling my leg with how bad it was and that it was going to do a switch up with how disturbing it was. But even when it seemed to be getting there, the film then just moves on, causing any disturbing aspect of it to fall apart. But first, what exactly is Megan is Missing about? Well, the film follows two teenage girls, Amy and Megan, when Megan goes missing. I know, a shocker, right? Amy then goes on an investigation trying to figure out who took her friend, leading to her finding the friend and then suffering the same fate herself. Now, you might be saying that sounds like a disturbing concept, right? Wrong. You're dead wrong. Why is that, you may be asking? Well, the acting. This movie's acting has got to be some of the worst I've seen in this series thus far, and I've already had to watch The Green Inferno. Like, it genuinely feels like a made-for-TV movie, and it's so baffling that this film is ranked as one of the most disturbing. Every time it seems to get close to being disturbing, this film just completely fucks it up. Don't get me wrong, the concept of this is extremely fucked up, and could easily place the film as one of the most disturbing in its own right. The idea of being trapped in a barrel underground with your rotting corpse of a friend is just a frankly disgusting concept, and it's quite shocking when it's shown on screen. Hell, I would say the aspect of the film that does the best is the actual shock, as the imagery with that is absolutely horrifying. For example, the scene where it's revealed that some of the photos of Megan were leaked online was absolutely brutal and honestly made the film much more horrific in my memory than while actually watching it. But the film's acting just completely drags you out, so it just ends up feeling exploitive and cheap. That's how a lot of this feels, as the message here is great and one that many people need to hear about internet safety, but the film just does it in every wrong possible way. This is some people's reality, and the horrible filmmaking surrounding this really doesn't help its case. Speaking of bad filmmaking, multiple times throughout there was decisions that were so bizarre that it made me question what the point of the film even was. Like, was this supposed to be some sick joke, or was this really trying to be something serious? The dialogue in this was such a slog, and feel like people have only really seen the last 20 minutes of the film. And to be fair, that is the best made part. However, once again, there's just so many things in that film that completely drag you out of what you are seeing. It seems like the worst kind of disturbing movie where it's trying to share a message, but it's never really smart enough for the message it's trying to share. It's so overt and ham-fisted with what it's trying to say that it comes across as sloppy, and I've seen tons of films that are heavy-handed with its message. But there's just something so sloppy about this film, and for my personal belief, you really shouldn't be tackling these subjects if you don't have the directing chops to handle it. This is where that line between exploitation and actually trying to push for something gets blurred for me. Because while the message here is inherently good, the poor presentation makes me wonder what exactly the director was thinking going for such a dark topic. But for how disturbing the film is, I guess I would put it in the disturbing category solely due to the concepts on display here, but that's quite literally the only reason. If the acting around the imagery was as well put together, then it could easily be near the top, but the script and acting are just so much of a mess that it really doesn't get anywhere near the top disturbing films. And as I stated earlier, the disturbing aspects of this film just seem destined for TikTok, but I hope to stop some people who might have heard of it from wasting their time with this film. And because of that, I would honestly have to give this a 1.5 out of 10. This is by far the worst one I've seen thus far, and I've never wanted to see this fucking movie ever again. I would honestly say I was less bored with Begotten, which is just insane to me, as I thought it couldn't possibly get any more boring, but here I am, once again having been proved completely wrong. This movie is really, really bad. I would honestly just suggest avoiding it. It's disturbing, but it's not really worth it. It's just kind of a lot of a slog for about an hour and a half, and then, oh, scary imagery at the end. And in conclusion, these films besides Megan is Missing were much better than the last few, with this being the ranking thus far. While we had one of my favorites so far, we also had one of the worst by far, and also, you may have noticed that this video is a little bit longer than the past few, while also being released every other week rather than every week. Well, that's because due to it being the summer, I wanted to push the links of these videos to be a little bit longer and a little bit more detailed on each entry, but because of that, uploads will be slightly less, but of course I will be putting in more detail into each review with a lot more time for each one. I really want to get fully in depth with these, and to end this video off, do you agree, do you disagree? Make sure to let me know, and also which one did you find the most disturbing? And remember, if you haven't already, to like and subscribe to the channel. It's free, and I would love to see you guys all again, and hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all soon.